Very good afternoon, everybody. Uh, we are live with the next session of our presentations. This is a group on translation studies, and in this session, we will have presentations by the students. Khushi, Kusum, and Maya will make the first group presentation in this slot, followed by Nanda, Pallavi, and Priyanshi, which will be followed by Rahul, RESHMA, and RIYA. And the last one, the fourth one on translation studies, will be by Trupti, Unnati, Vishwa, and Yashraj. The presentations will be made on these articles. The first one will be on Ganesh Devy's article, Translation Theory and Indian Perspective, followed by A.K. Ramanujan's article on translating a Tamil poem, which will be followed by Tejaswini Niranjana's article, Introduction to History in Translation, Situating Translation, History and Post-Structuralism. The last one will be the article written by E.V. Ramakrishnan on shifting centers and emerging margins, translation, and the shaping of the modernist poetic discourse in Indian poetry. So let us invite the first group to start with the presentation.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. Today is the presentation on comparative and translation study. Me, my co-partner Kusum and Maya. Kusum and Maya, three are presentation on translation and literary history and Indian view by Ganesh Devy. This is the three academic information. This table of content. First, start with the abstract. Ganesh Devi examined the intricate relationship between translation and literary history, emphasizing its role in shaping culture and literary tradition. He contrasts Western metaphysical view on translation with the Indian perspective, highlighting the translation transformative and creative essence. Research problem: how does the translation influence the literary history and tradition, particularly in India? Objective to first to examine the role of translation in shaping literary movement. Second, to explore the difference between Western and Indian perspective on translation. Third, to highlight the India's translating conscious and its impact on literary tradition. Methodology: comparative examination of Western and Indian approaches to translation. Key findings: translation is central to Indian literary history, serving as a creative and transformating process. Unlike the West Indian tradition, view translation as a revival rather than a loss of originality. First, Ganesh Devi information. His full name was Ganesh. His full name is Ganesh Narayanas Devi, born in 1950. He is a critic, thinker, editor, educator, and activist. He is a professor of English at the Maharaja Sayajirao University of Baroda, 1982 to 1960. Uh, he resigned in 1996 to work with the denotified and nomadic tribes and Adivasi. He key works: first, After Amnesia, a landmark book in literary theory. Second, In Another Tongue, 1993. He focused on translation study. Third, Of Many Heroes in 1998, examined diverse themes in literature and culture. And last, The Crisis Within the Knowledge and Education in India, 2017. Key points. Many literary traditions originate in translation Anglo-Irish, Indian, English and settler colonies. In the article, highlight the tradition of Anglo-Irish, Indian, English, settler in colonized with the translation. Second, translation in Western thought symbolize the exile and divines originality. In the Western metaphysics, translation is viewed as a fall from the original, reflecting the post-Bible crisis. In the article, critics the viewpoints contrasting in with the Indian perspective. Third, the translation bridging linguistic and culture gaps in post-colonial context. In the articles mentioned that the writer like Jaydeva, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, Michael Madhusudan Dutt, etc. to exemplify the tradition. Language as a system of sign. The concept of the translating consciousness, challenging the monolingual linguistic theory in India. Indian metaphysics support the view of translation as the transformation and the continuity. The article will start with the J. Hills Miller quote. The translation is the wandering existence of a text in a perpetual exist. The article opened with this line to perspective, linking the translation to the Christian myth of the fall and post-Babel crisis. Christian myth of the fall, exile and wandering. In the article, metaphor like exile and wandering to explain how the translation in the West is to see the fall from the origin, reflecting the culture and religious. In Western metaphysics, translation is an exile, a fall from the origin, and the mythical exile is a metaphorical translation, a post-Bible crisis. Next, the placement of the translation in literary history remains unclear with the no conscious among critics. Key movement include the revolutionary impact of Bible translation on English style. Second, the Chaucer adaptation of the Boseko style in the Canterbury Tales. And third, the Dryden and Pops use the translation to the restored the order. Next, the translation has significantly shaped the literary tradition over the past 2 centuries, notably influencing Indian English literature through the ideological effort in the late 18th century and 19th century. Translation are the often seen and unoriginal, leading to limited exploration of their aesthetics. First question is do they belong to the history of the T language or S language? Second question is do they form an independent tradition all by themselves? My learning outcome is that I learned this article and I learning and teach the in India the bridging to language and culture through the concept of translating consciousness, highlight the multilingual dynamic shape in literary tradition in our India. Second, the translation reflect the intersection of linguistic anthropology and the translation study, addressing its complexity and fostering literary evolution. I learning outcome with this article through the in the article mentioned the Roman Jacobson three key aspect through the understand the linguistic concept translation study. Okay, this is from my side. Now I like to call Kusum for further information.
Thank you, KHUSHI, for making a stage this article. So I want to discuss the key arguments of this article. So first argumentator and with argument, we have a Roman Jacobson. In his essay on the linguistic of translation, proposed a threefold classification of translation. First one is those from one verbal order to another verbal order. Another one is those from language system to another language. And the last one is those from a verbal order to another system of science. And apart from this, Jacobson also argued that any poetry is cannot be translated through the words. Like if you want to translate the poetry, so we have to add some things, like we couldn't balancing the meters and syntax of the poetry. So we can say that the creative translation is possible while we translating the poetry kind of thing. Another argument is came from the Noam Chomsky. The concept of semantic universal, which is significant. His approach is actually based on Saussure monolingual focus, has limited applications to translation studies. And Noam Chomsky actually said that he argued that every language have kind of structural similarities, like a verb and some kind of grammars, subject matter. So these kind of thing are same in every language. So we can say that where we translate something, so we have to focus on the core meaning instead of words and other thing. So and another thing which is came from Chomsky's argument, that humans have an innate ability to translate something. So it is kind of and as we have this word monolingual. So he also argued, not he, but in the article, another thing is discussed that Indians have a kind of ability to translate something, as they are by birth monolingual. So it is kind of plus point, which is apart from different from the Western countries. So Western translations theories lack a multilingual perspective, as written here, and overemphasize finding perfect the matches, ignoring the complexity of real translation and practice. And another argument is came from Jesse Catford. He outlined his views on his linguistic of translation in his work, A Linguistic Theory of Translation. He aimed to identify the different linguistic levels involved in translation. And the main idea of him is translating a linguistic act, so any theory of translation must be based on linguistics. So, the one we can say that a mechanical definition which is given by him is that translation is process of replacing a text in one language with a text in another language. So it is kind of very mechanical kind of definition to translate something, which is can be if you heard the name translation, so we must be thought that it is like one text and we have to change it in another language. So it is kind of, we can say there's a quite mechanical definition given by J.C. Catford. And another thing that he argued, that a comprehensive theory of translation must come from a broader theory of language known as a general linguistic theory. And modern general linguistic is strongly influenced by the anthropology, particularly the work of scholars like Durkheim and Lévi-Strauss. And let's delve into core content. So in 19th century, Europeans actually were organized the humanities knowledge into threefold hierarchies. So first one is comparative studies. It is for themselves European study, like they were comparing their tradition and their literature. And another thing is Orientalism, for studies the Orient, like Middle East countries and the Orients. And the last one is anthropology, for the rest of the world, like the colonial states or the tribal states. The modern Western linguistic has been influenced by three of them. And here the very interesting thing is written here by represented by William Jones, that he comparing the Sanskrit language with their European language, that he find similarities between Sanskrit and European language as in Roman and Latin language as well. So this could be reason that why Europeans are interested in studied and reading of Indian ancient texts. So for a long time, linguistics followed by the approaches of comparative philology. Later, with Saussure and Lévi-Strauss, linguistics shifted to exploring language through anthropological perspective. And here is my learning outcome. So while we heard, by personally I want to say that when I heard the translation, so it is like very common thing that to translate this thing into another thing, but it is not like that much easy, that much simple thing that I come to know that how the theory of translation is different in Western countries and in Indian, as I gone through this article, that while Western culture values originality, and in Indian culture celebrates the reuse and transformation of ideas through the translation. And the act of translation is not like to switch the text into another thing, or it not kind of tool, but it is kind of bridge, according to me. It is kind of bridge between language and culture, shaping literary tradition and histories. And as this particularly in perspective of India, so I want to say that translation in India is like a rebirth, when stories retain their essence, even retold in the different forms. So this is from my side. For further information, I would like to call my co-partner Maya.
Thank you for full article cover KHUSHI and KUSUM. Now I discuss the problems in translation studies. First, translation is more than linguistics. Translation is both an aesthetic and ideological problem with significant implications for literary history. It is not simply replicating a text, but transferring an organized system of sense into a corresponding system in another language. Second, nature of translation. Translation revitalizes the original work in a new linguistic and temporal context. The original text remains intact while the translation approximates and transcends it. Third, parallels with literary history. Similar to translation, literary history struggles with questions of originals and sequentiality. These issues remain unresolved in both fields. Fourth, Indian perspective. Indian literary communities have a translating consciousness, embracing translation as foundational. Modern Indian literatures owe their development to translation effort by figures like Jayadeva, Hemchandra, Misal, Madhuchandan Dutt, H.N. Apte, by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. Conclusion. The Western metaphysical view of translation as a fall or exile. Indian metaphysics embraces the idea of continuity and transformation, akin to the soul's migration from one body to another. This perspective emphasizes that significance, like the soul, transcends temporality and remains timeless. Indian literary traditions rooted in this philosophy value the reuse and revitalization of plots, stories, and characters across generations, placing less emphasis on originality. Instead, the true measure of literary excellence lies in the ability to transform and reinterpret the original, making Indian literary heritage inherently a tradition of translation. This is article my learning outcome. Translation connects cultures, enriches literary traditions, and transforms texts across languages. While often criticized in the West for reducing originality, example like Chaucer and the Bible reveal its creativity. Indian traditions view it as revitalization, celebrating continuity. Scholars like Roman Jacobson acknowledge its challenges but emphasize its cultural and literary significance. This is my references, and thank you. Now you can ask question.
My question is, how is translation like reincarnation in Indian philosophy?
Okay, translation like reincarnation in Indian philosophy, just as the soul transfer one body to another body without losing its essence. As translation transform ideas from one language to another, continue to their core idea, to transform their content. So thank you.
My question for Kusum. So, how does Chomsky's universal grammar activity like a blueprint for translation? Okay, the blueprint of Chomsky is like the theory which is useful for the translators to navigate through the structural similarities, but even when the meanings and words were changed. But one thing that personally I want to add here, that it is kind of limitation in Chomsky's theory, that if we focus or if we follow his theory, which is based on to follow the grammatical things, then we must ignoring the historical or emotional depth of the particular text. So it is kind of limitation. So thank you very much. This is from our side.
Hello everyone. Today we are going to present seventh article on translating a Tamil poem, and these are presenters' names. First me, Nanda Chavda. Second PALLAVI PARMAR, and third PRIYANSHIBA GOHIL. First introduce table of content, and then first brief introduction of article. The article begins start by discussing world literature. Ramanujan, his arise question: how can one translate a poem from a different time, culture, and language? Here, the article focuses on the external history of literature, but the challenges of translation, specifically the process of bringing classic Tamil poetry into modern English, including its risks, losses, and hidden nuisances, and fortunate discoveries. Here, Ramanujan uses the examples of Tamil's poem he translates into English, illustrate the difficulties he encountered in the process. See about the A.K. Ramanujan, brief overview. His full name, Atipet Krishnaswamy Ramanujan, is born in 16 March 1929 in Mysore in India. He was also poet, scholar, philosopher, florist, and translator and playwright. Also, he academic research range across 5 languages: English, Kannada, Tamil, Telugu, and Sanskrit. These are notable works, and he also get a Sahitya Akademi Award after this death. Now, the abstract in more this papers explore A.K. Ramanujan approaches to translating classical Tamil poems into English, acknowledging the challenges of bridging linguistic and structural gaps between Tamil and English.
Ramanujan here highlights the integrates of Tamil poetry, emphasizing the interconnected relationships, landscapes, and cultural elements within the each poem. Here, he suggests that the successful translation involves capturing these connections through layers resembling circle within the circle. The article here discussing specific challenges faced in translating the classical Tamil poem. Here the example Enikurum 203 emphasizing the importance of understanding cultural context and advocating for translating cluster of poems to convey intertextuality and the systematic pattern. Despite acknowledging the impossibility of a perfect translation, Ramanujan here argues that if a translation effectively conveys the essence of the poem across the language, it becomes a valuable and creative work. These are the key points of first challenges in translation. The difficulties, difficulties that arise when changing text from one language to another language. Another complexity of translation, in we can say the various factors that make translation difficult, such as a culture, context, and the language structure. Third, in translation framework, in we can say basic structure of method used to guide the translation process. Web of Tamil poetry interconnected the intricate connections and the relationships found within Tamil poetry. Another Tamil poetic legacy in the rich history and tradition of Tamil poetry that has been passed down through generations. Another clustered approach to translations in the method that groups similar ideas or themes together for more accurate translation. And the last, structural representations, in we can say the way in which the form and the organization of text are conveyed in the translation. Now the key arguments. First, translation as impossibility. Here the Ramanujan's views translation as a loss of essence but a creative recreations. Another phonological differences. Tamil's 6 nasal consonants and unique vowels consonant structures, deeply English phonology. Another 6 syntax and grammar. Tamil's left branching syntax and absence of articles create star. Here we can a or the which remove and creates a stark contrast with the English. Symbolism and the landscape. Tamil landscape serve as a poetic metaphor for emotions, adding layer to translation. And last, intertextuality. Tamil poetry interconnectedness requires a deep understanding of culture and literary references. And in my learning outcomes, understand A.K. Ramanujan's contribution to world literature and the translation study. Another, explore the complexity while translating and classical Tamil poetry into English. And the recognize the significance of cultural context and intertextuality in translation, and analyze the Ramanujan clustered approaches to translation, and the last, appreciate the challenges and creative aspect involved in poetic translation. Now Ramanujan's concept in mostly article in the 3-part, divided into 3-part. Further information will give Pallavi Parmar.
Thank you, Nanda Didi. Hello, everyone. I am Pallavi Parmar, and let's see about how A.K. Ramanujan divide the article in 3 parts. So, in first part, he started with the historical context and the core challenge of translation, that how Tamil poetry spanning over 2,000 poems by more than 400 poets has survived centuries of adversity, including wars, political upheavals, and natural decay. And these works face challenges such as the fragility of palm leaves, scribble errors, and damage from insects, weather, and fire. A.K. Ramanujan, as he started his article with the question that how to translate a poem from a different time and culture and language, that and he also discussed about the Robert Frost's idea that poetry is what is lost in translation. That Ramanujan suggests that accepting the impossibility of a perfect translation is the first step of achieving it. Like that, not any translator. There is a no perfect translation. If we need essence or if we need the main idea, so we need to change in the main poem or main structure of the work. The phonological and the metrical barriers. Tamil sound system include 6 nasal consonants, and which is compared with English 3. Tamil distinguishes between long and short vowels, unlike English, which uses diphthongs and glides. Metrical differences add complexity. For example, in Tamil's heavy syllables and consonant rhymes contrast with English preferences for end rhymes. Tamil words NA illustrates the challenge. The first syllable is heavy because it's closed and the second due to its long vowel and nay. So we can find that it is written and pronounced in Tamil like that, but while translating it, one can face many challenges into that. Syntactic and grammatical difference between Tamil and English. Like Tamil follows left branching syntax, that means first subject, then object, and then verb. While in English, it uses right branching syntax, that means subject, then verb, and then object. If we take example, this is a Tamil sentence. If we directly translate in, we can find that first to school, the one who went. But in English, if we take it, so we have to put it like subject, verb, and object. So the translated sentence becomes the one who went to school. We can find in Tamil that there is a lack of copula verbs like is in the present tense, equational sentence and article like a and the. We cannot find the copula verbs and articles in the Tamil language. It also does not have explicit degrees of adjectives like sweet, sweeter, sweetest. If we want to translate the Tamil words in English, so there is no any, or in English in Tamil, so there is no any degrees of adjectives. What challenges in translation, that this synaptic and the grammatical differences such as the lack of articles and the reverse order of dates require the restructuring for the natural translations from Tamil to English. For example, the date structure in English, we have 19th of June in 1988, but in the Tamil it becomes 1988 June 19th. Cultural and literary context in Tamil poetry, like symbolism of landscape. Here in article, he gives example of Kurinji, mountains. So in love poem, we can find it represent as a first love, and Marutham, which means farmland, which is represented as a domestic love. Landscapes carry, in translation, landscape carry very deep and cultural emotional significance, which reflecting human emotions. Like we can find that the thematic progression, transition from innocence. Like here he give example of muddy water and milk and honey in one poem. So milk and honey represents innocence, while muddy water, which represents experience. Like we can find the journey from childhood purity, innocent, to adulthood maturity, as we can find in What She Said poem. Intertextual web. Tamil poetry connects diverse themes and genres and symbols. It requires contextual understanding for accurate translation, as references are deeply interlinked. Like we can, if we translate it into word to word, we cannot get the main gist, or maybe we are diverted towards another meaning, but we cannot find the main essence of the poem. So the context is very important for translating a poem. Ramanujan emphasizes that no translation can be entirely literal or word for word. Effective translation involves the free approach, capturing, like you have to take an essence of that poem and then translate the poem. The goal is to translate relationship between sound, meanings, cultural context, and the poetic traditions. This requires balancing the accessibility of target language while preserving the original poetic essence and cultural richness. In the part 2, Ramanujan's approach to translating classical Tamil poetry, it's very fundamental. Like translation focuses on perceiving relationship and networks of meaning rather than converting only words. Like if we have that first idea that word-to-word translation, but Ramanujan focuses on main to pay attention on relationship with context and background of the poem. Each poem exists with the complex cultural, literary, linguistic associations, universals in a form like sound systems and grammar and content. Themes like love and war make a translation possible through though challenging. Here he give one poem, En Kurunuru, what she said. So in that he said that the word Anne, literally if we take it means mother, is a term of address for a woman is contextually used in the poem. But if we later on say the context, we can find it is used for girlfriend. It is translated as a friend also to clarify the intended relationship in the poem. Ensures the translation reflects modern and accurate relational content. If we take a structure that original Tamil syntax features a long branching phrase such as which is given here, his land, in leaf, hole, slow, animal having drunk and leftover muddy at water. But in Ramanujan's translation, we can find the leftover water is in his land, low in the water holes, covered with the leaves and muddied by animals. So, what is the main approach of Ramanujan's? That he preserves the order of themes like lands, water, which symbolizes the possession and setting, leaf-covered water holes. We can have visual imagery, muddied by animals. So, we can find the consequences of it. So, he prioritized themes over individual words. Contextual and thematic significance. We can find the poem belongs to Kurinchi genre, which depicts the lover's first union in hillside and landscape. The title, What She Said to Her Girlfriend When She Returned from the Hills, encapsulates the entire context, including the speaker, listener, and setting. The title is derived from the traditional colophon accompanying the poem. Intertextuality is a central. Each poem is a part of set and a landscape and a genre, creating a network of dialogues and relationship. Poems inspire and overlap across the themes. Love poems evolves into comic or parodic versions. Themes of love and war transition into religious motifs with figures like Krishna. If we have a Krishna side, Krishna as a lover boy and Krishna as a warrior. So Krishna becomes the symbol. We can find that the in which context he is used. We can find by that we can get essence of the poem. As in that also we can find the landscape. As he said that. His, if we take in a love poems, it is about meetings, first meeting. But in the war, it reflects that attack or silent, or we can say that surprising attack or silent attack in night. While in the forest in the love poem, we can find symbolize longing or patience or waiting. But in the war poem, we can find it as some kind of trap or attack. That Ramanujan's transitional challenges and goals, like navigating the complex syntax of Tamil, which contrasts with linear English structures, adapt cultural and emotional nuances carefully, preserve authenticity. It focuses on translating themes, networks rather than a single words or phrases. It bridges relationship between the poem's original context and its modern audience, and highlight the universal themes with a specific cultural settings. The Tamil poetry demonstrates cultural longevity with love and war poems, as we see earlier, and modernizing. It play a vital role in preserving and modernizing links for a global audience. The translator act as a mediator. Like we can find that there is an original poem, and we want in another translated version. So translator is a mediator who ensure that interconnected dialogues and networks within the poetry remain intact. The essence is remain. As it is. The balance faithful to source text with the need for readability and audience engagement. Like translator, what is the main challenge for translator? Translation is a negotiation between perfect representation and creative adaptation, inspired by the Chinese tunnel parable. Like in here we also have example of Chinese tunnel parable. Like if we need to dig tunnel. So they suggest that to start to dig tunnel for tunnel from both sides. If they meet, which is well, but if then the both ends not meet at one center, so it becomes two different works, or it became a creative. We can say that we have two different style in the poem. Where alignment might not be perfect, but connections are still meaningful. So, what my learning outcome is that at first I have very narrow that my viewpoint on translation, but by reading this article, I came to know that what type of challenges is there while translating a poetry, including the differences in sounds, grammars, and meaning between languages. And I also came to know that how Tamil poetry uses nature and landscape as a symbol, as we have a depiction of five landscapes like hills, seashore, and we have this type of five landscape. So how it helps symbols to express emotions and ideas, how the interconnection of the Tamil poems through shared themes and cultural traditions forming a larger literary framework. And I also gained insight into how universal themes like love and war are portrayed differently. We can say that by same words we can have with a different context, we can have the whole different meaning of the poem. Realize the role of language structure and the Tamil grammar in shaping poetic expression and interpretation. So yeah, that's it from my side. And now for further discussion, I would like to call Priyanshi.
Thank you, Pallavi. So here I discussed about four things that makes translation possible. First one is universal, interiorized, systematicity, and structural mimicry. So first one is universal. Without universal, no language learning, translation, and comparative studies can be possible. If they don't exist, we would have had to invent them. And universal of structure involves signifier, for example, sound, grammar, poetic, rhetoric, and poetic, and signified like what the poetry about and what the poetry meant to in different cultures. So both the signifier and signified are necessary and important in translation. And then second one is intertext context. It is all about intertextuality. Tamil poem, Tamil poem connects nature to emotions, like using the word hills, which represents the first love and union. And this Tamil poetry is not just about the words, but also capturing the meaning behind them. And to fully understand these poems requires studying the intertextual web of commentaries and grammars that contextualize and interpreted them over time. Then third one is systematicity. Tamil poetry is a part of large system where poem connects through themes and genre. And for example, themes like love poem, which focuses on personal emotions, and war poem, which also focuses on private life. And rather than translating individual poem alone, it is best to translate cluster, then shed light on each other. So the intertextuality allows the translator to represent the conceptual world these works creates. Then fourth one is the structural mimicry. The most important task of the translator is to mimic the unique structural figures of the individual poems to convey relationship rather than isolated items. Through a translation may not perfectly represent the original, but if it succeeds in carrying the essence of the poem across languages, it has value as a separate creative work. Problem in translation. some elements of the original cannot be transferred at all. One can often convey a sense of the original rhythm, but not the language-bound meter. One can mimic levels of diction, but not the actual sound of the original words. And translation are basically transpositions and reattachments and interpretations. Conclusion. So the translation must not only represent but represent the original. And a translation is an artist on oath, means a translator who promises that uh, uh, loyal with original work. And example of Chinese emperor. So a Chinese emperor ordered two teams to dig up tunnel and work from both sides of mountain. And someone asked that, what if they don't meet? And counselor answered that if they don't meet, we will have two tunnels instead of one. So these stories shows that this story if the representation in another language is not close enough, but still succeed in carrying the poem in some sense, we will have two poems instead of one. Learning outcomes. Through the article, I understood what are the challenges and possibility in translating poetry across language and culture, and I also learned how universal cultural context and systematic connections shape the translation process, and also recognize the translators' dual responsibility to the original language and the target language. And I also appreciate how translation is not just replication but a creative act, often resulting into distinct work of art, and gain insight into Ramanujan's perspective on the balance between faithfulness and innovation in translation. These are the references, and thank you. If you have any question, then feel free to ask.
So, Priyanshi, my question is, how does the Chinese emperor's tunnel story relate to translations?
Okay, ma'am. The story of China's emperor's tunnels show that even if the translation doesn't perfectly match to the original, but it creates something new and valuable, like having two tunnels instead of one. That's from my side.
My question is, in Tamil poetry, landscape witness human emotion. How might social media serve as a modern landscape witnessing contemporary relationship?
Yes, Khushi. In Tamil poetry, as we see, the landscapes witness human emotions. So, if we take an example of social media, so we can have that social media is a platform where now people express their emotions, their lives. So, if we take example like Instagram like a mountain that which is represented first union of lovers. So now we can have a virtual union of lovers with the help of social media like in DMs, and we can also find that people are expressing their lives through social media, and we can find that online dating apps also part of this. So landscape, if today's writer write any poem or so they have to keep in mind that this is also a virtual landscape where a relationship grows, and where human emotions can depicted like digital footprints also, and we can have that hashtags, and so people were expressing their lives through this. So if we take today's time, so we have to depict them also as a part of growing relationships. Yes, that's it from my side, and thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Rahul Desai and my co-presenter like RESHMA, BILAKHIYA and RIYA BHATT, and we are presenting our presentation on the topic of sitting, translation, history, post-structuralism and the colonial context, article by Tejaswini Niranjana. Now let's start with the abstract. Niranjana draws attention to how translators such as William Jones portrayed the colonized cultures as inferior and static in order to defend imperial dominance in the section of history in translation. Examine how translation reinforced passivity and effeminacy stereotypes by interpolating colonized person into colonial discourses in the focuses of translation, focus on the translation as a interpolations. Niranjana exposed how colonial translations, historicis, foundations serve to legitimize Western rule in the question of history. Research problem like the part translation plays in maintaining colonial power, power structures on the text, power structure on the society, and various things. Objective like to investigate the resistance potential of colonial translation processes and critique them. Methodology like applying Derrida's theory to a post-structuralism, list examination of colonial translations, post-structuralist theory given by Derrida by supplement. Key findings, although it might be reinterpreted as a means of constant testing colonial narratives, translation serve as a justification for imperial dominance. Now let's start with the history in translation. Niranjana start with this first quote by Charles Trevelyan. In the quote, this quote reflect the colonial narratives that frame the desiring the Western education and Western cultures. And this quote justify the colonial impositions of English education, English texts, and knowledge systems. It also present this quote also present the image of Indian voluntary to represent the English text and dependence on the Western knowledge systems. Now, situating translations like colonialism and translation. Translation was used as a tool of colonial domination and represent the colonized in way that justify imperial rules. The act of like we see that the Niranjana argue that the far from being neutral and objective process, the process of translation is deeply connected asymmetric relation with the colonized rule and power. Representation of power, translation as a practice constructed fixed, often demeaning, and representation of colonized culture, reinforcing stereotype of the other. Here also draw the idea of Niranjana draw the idea of other, like Edward said, Edward said's idea other. This representation made colonized societies appear static, inferior, or incapable of self-governance. Here we also find the concept of hegemony. Hegemony is concept of hegemony. That hegemony concept is legitimize the ruled by the colonized and the self-governance on the text, on the society, and on the creativity of the text. Historicist frameworks, teleology. Colonial translations were informed by the historicist and the teleology models that portrayed non-Western societies as primitive or unchanging. Non-Western, like it's philosophical of representation, reality, and knowledge system. That representation is direct deals with the aesthetic reality and transparent reality. that such frameworks placed Western civilization at the apex of hierarchy, marginalizing other as inferior or incomplete. The translator like William Jones. William Jones reconstructed the text like purified and constructed text Shakuntala for the European audience. Depicted Indian civilization as golden in its past but degraded in its present. It considered idea for the Indian perspective, through the Indian perspective. Impact on the education and law. English education justified by the discrediting indigenous knowledge through the translation. Legal texts like Manu's Dharma Shastra were translated to enforce colonial authority. Post-structuralism list critique challenges the notion of transparency and fluidity in the translation. Paul D. Mann and Derrida's interpretation of Walter Benjamin's seminal essay, The Task of the Translator. Here we can see that the Walter Benjamin's seminal essay, The Task of the Translator, is explore the analysis and explore the relationship between the translation and historiography. Through this article, Niranjana argued that all that matter that considered the ideological narratives. Used Derrida supplement to show how translation reinforce and disrupt the colonial power. Is also considered the colonial power and their legitimized rules by the marginalized people and authorities. But in this Derrida's supplement, we can see that the power of neutral and process about the text. Then we see that the translation as a colonial technology. Translation shaped the ideological discourses of history, law, and culture, created colonial subject identities aligned with the imperial agendas. Contestation and resistance. Rethinking translation as a tool for resistance through deconstruction, challenges representation, historicism, and teleology in colonial translations. Here in which this article I learn about something to translation is not easy task. Translation is a very crucial and very meaningful task. Like analyze how colonial translations like those by William Jones reconstructed non-Western culture as degradation, legitimize imperial interventions, then understand the Derrida's critiques, representation, and how it exposes the ideological power and translation in shaping colonial and post-colonial discourses, and a question about the teleology models of history that portrays the colonized society as primitive and unchanging, highlighting the constructed nature of this representation of transparent reality and originality of history and its texts. Now, further, I would like to call Reshma. Thank you.
So I'm going to deal with translation as interpellation, where interpellation means to interrupt by asking questions. So William Jones and colonial translation, where we can see that he arrived in India in the year 1783 as a Supreme Court judge, Kolkata, and his goal was to domesticate the Orient and to integrate it into European learning, where we know that William Jones came to India to teach the European traditions and to rule on them by their own traditions. And his ambition was to know Indian better than any other European.
Three interconnected motivations we can see given by William Jones, where first the need for translation by the European, where the natives are unreliable interpreters of their own laws and culture, where we can say that European thought that the Indians are not capable of uh, capable of the Indian could not explain their own laws and culture. So the British step in. Second, the desire to be a lawgiver to give Indians their own laws, where the British wanted to act as lawgivers and creating laws for Indians by interpreting their traditions through a colonial lens. And third, the desire to purify the Indian culture and speak on its behalf, where the British try to claim to clean up Indian culture and speak on its behalf and making it more acceptable through the Western people. Now, the cultural hierarchy and education, where the translation placed Europe at the top of cultural hierarchy, where we can say that the British placed themselves at the top of cultural pyramid and making Indian knowledge seems inferior. Promoted governance, efficiency, and profit for England, where Niranjana tries to says that they made approach ruling India easier and more profitable for the British. Now, the role of missionaries, where translated Indian text with westernized coherence, we can see in this article situating translation. Example given by William Borden Carey, where British education, where the British placed themselves at the top of cultural pyramid and advocated salvation through conversion to Western religion, where the missionaries also translated the Indian text, but their goal was to spread Christianity, and they rewrote the Indian ideas to align with Western religious beliefs, claiming Indians needed salvation. English education. Where Macular's vision, we can see that how he create intermediaries, Indians in blood and English in intellect, means British education aimed to create Indians who looked Indian but who thought like Europeans, and liberate Indian minds from priest tyranny. The argument given by Charles Grant, where he says that British education was framed as a way to free Indians from their own priest influence, but it was really about strengthening the colonial control. The next is translation as colonial power, where we can see the practices of overdetermined codification of Indian languages and creation of Western style dictionaries, where the Indian languages were formalized into dictionaries and grammar books, but in a way that which suited mostly the Europeans. Standardization of text reinforced the Eurocentric cultural dominance, where by defining what Indian culture really was, the Britishers imposed their own worldview and sidelining the Indian perspectives. And purpose of translation, the consolidation of colonial power, where by how they were controlling the Indian texts which were understood, but the British solidified their own power. Recasting Indian identity under a Eurocentric framework, where Indian culture and identity were reshaped to fit a European framework, where they were making India appear subordinate to the Europe. So the key takeaways, the learning outcome of this article is like I learned from this article personally that first by without linguistic study we cannot translate any of the language.
with the help of that. So we need to study first the linguistic studies, and then to enter in the translation field. And it also creates a huge breach between language and literature as a part of translation. So that was from my side. And for further information, I would like to call Riya.
Very good afternoon to all of you. So, for further, I am going to discuss the question of history, which involves a critique of historicism in itself. The criticism of Hegelian historicism. Hegel's frameworks marginalize non-Western cultures as a prehistorical prehistorical, presenting history as Eurocentric teleological progressions. It also denies the agency to colonized peoples, reducing their histories to the static backdrops. If we look on this post-colonial rebuttal, then we come to know about the Nietzsche's work and Gadamer's work, that how it is prioritized the past dynamics influence on the present. Yes, and anti-essential history is also in a way challenge the colonial impositions, opening space for localized narratives. Translation as an ideology, we can see that the colonial translation practices, we come to know that this kind of translation reframed the Indian culture under the Western paradigms, portraying Hindus as inferior. This translation justified the colonial interventions by constructing the distorted representations of the colonized. If we look the impact of it, then it is create a dual misunderstanding. First, it is Western audience viewed colonized culture and as a static, and while colonized individuals internalized these stereotypes. Here we can see that how the history in a way is misunderstanding. Yes, materialized historiography. Then Benjamin's contribution, we can find that it how it advocates the viewing of history through his fragmented and interactive moments rather than as a linear continuum. Translation serves as a mode of historical engagement, interpreting the past events for present understanding. And if we look on the about these implications, then it challenges the fidelity focused translation, emphasizes its role in shaping historical narratives. Also, we previously discussed about this Derrida's theory and post-colonial applications. Also, Rahul Bhai discussed about the supplement kind of things that deconstruct the origin, the question of pure historical essence of, and it's also highlighting the inherent gaps and differences. If we look about this implication, then post-colonial theory leverages deconstruction to dismantle fixed identities imposed by colonial narratives. Affirmative deconstruction disrupt colonial discourse while advocating for reconstructive approaches. Yes, hybrid identity and translation. We all know that Bhumike Bhabha's concept of identity, which reveals the contradiction within the colonial authority. It also highlights the transformative potential of hybrid identity and reconfiguring cultural narratives. And here we if we want to look about this translations role, then it acts as a site of cultural negotiation, challenging essentialist histories and fostering innovations. Yes, if we look about this learning outcome, So by this article, I learn how to understand post-structuralist ideas, the role of translation also I have learned, and how to engage with the theoretical frameworks, reframe historical understanding, and develop the critical thinkings. Before reading this article, I have so very narrow-minded idea about this translation and the history. I just think that to translate something into another language, it is only the translation, and history remains the same. But through this reading, I come to know that it is not so. By translating one text to another text, we also have to engage the people with us, and it's our responsibility to maintain the history which is written in original language, that is only come into this translation. So it is in a way breach for these culture to culture. So this is my learning outcome. And in conclusion, according to Niranjana's interpretation, translation was a potent ideological instrument in the colonial endeavor rather than neutral or in a way linguistic process. It created hegemonic histories, controlled how the colonized world portrayed and maintained unequal power dynamics. However, Niranjana's make the case for translation potential as a resistance tactic by reimagining it via the post-structuralist lens. It is possible to regain the cultural agency by challenging the historicist and the teleological frameworks that continue to the marginalized non-Western histories and the cultures through the deconstruction of the colonial translations. So these are some references, and thank you. If you have any question, then please.
So, my question is, what role does effective history play in reinterpreting colonial era translation today?
If we want to look on this contemporary time, then we come to know that it in a way affect to the history also. Then also it reveals that how this kind of translation often misinterpreting the things like colonized culture to fit colonial agendas. By revisiting them, we come to know the challenges to these recover suppressed voices and to create more accurate and inclusive historical narratives. So this is how we can see that the role of translation also in a way effect in contemporary times. So thank you.
How did William Jones' translation work support colonial power and reshape Indian identity through a Eurocentric lens?
Okay, Nanda. So, as we know that William Jones came to India for the purpose of translation, but he came in India as a for translation, but he imposed his own colonial ideas on the Indians, and how the translation give approach to William Jones, and he positions the Indians as lawgivers and purifiers, which leads towards the Indians consolidating colonial power and reshape the Indian identity and reducing the Indians approach, and in this way he put a Eurocentric lens towards the support of with the support of colonial power. Thank you.
Trupti and SODHA. We are going to discuss the article of E.V. Ramakrishnan, Shifting Centers and Emerging Margins, Translations and the Shaping of Modernist Poetic Discourse in Indian Poetry. So, first of all, the objectives, which are interpreting cross-cultural influence, shifting literary centers, modernist expressions, interdisciplinary connections, and decolonizing literature. Research problems can be how has translation influenced the development of modernist poetic discourse in Indian poetry, and what are the challenges of balancing global modernist influence with local cultural and linguistic traditions in Indian poetry. Another one, what are the difficulties in accurately representing the nuance of Indian poetry across different languages through translation, and how do translations addresses or perpetuate colonial ideologies in Indian poetry. Talking about the methodology, which examines translations of Indian poetry alongside their originals to identify shifts in meaning, tone, and cultural context, incorporates perspectives from translation studies, cultural theory, and postcolonial studies to frame the study. Investigates both the textual transformations that occur during translation and their implications within broader cultural and historical context. Concentrates on themes like cultural negotiation, identity formation, and the decentralization of literary authorities as they appear in translated works. Then key findings, which the process of translation has contributed to a shift in literary focus, enabling diverse voices from regional languages to participate in a broader discourse. Translation has facilitated meaningful cultural exchanges, allowing Indian poetry to engage with global literary movements while maintaining its unique identity. The process of translating poetry involves significant challenges in preserving cultural nuance, linguistic complexities, and the original emotional depth. Translation has transformed the thematic and stylistic contour of Indian poetry, fostering innovations and experimentations in its modern histories. Okay, moving to the introduction of the article, that is the chapters explore with the significant influence of poetry and the time era which is dealing is 1950 and 1970, emphasizing the interplay between the global modernist idea and local Indian literary traditions. So, translation as a catalyst of modernism. Indian modernist poetry was deeply shaped by translations of Western poets like Baudelaire, Rilke, Eliot, and Yeats. This translation introduced foreignizing elements, disrupting established norms of poetry rooted in Romanticism and nationalist aesthetics. Role of major Indian poets as translators, like poets such as Bodhdev Bose, Agyai, Dilip Chitre, and Ayyappa Panikar were also translators, and their translation acted as tools for breaking the monopoly of traditional literary sensibilities, thus creating space for alternative styles and discourses. So, little magazines and their importance, like how these little magazines were like important during that time, and how. Okay, so translations during the early modernist phase often appeared in little magazines, experimental publications that served as a platform for avant-garde writings. This magazine opened up Indian poetry to global influences and helped legitimize experimental non-mainstream poetic styles. Now, a translation beyond textual practices, like drawing on Henry Lefferts's concept of translation as refraction or rewriting. The chapter expands the idea of translation to include critical essays, histories, and anthologies, commentaries. Let's take an example of Sudhirnath Datta's essay on T.S. Eliot in Bengali, like and Ayyappa Panikar's critique of Vallathol in Malayalam are considered translational writings.
And this writing introduced Western modes of thinking to interrogate enriched poetic traditions. Okay, so moving to the very first part of this article, that is relation between modernity and modernism in Indian context. Like modernity in Indian context refers to the echoes of transformation changes triggered by the colonialism, which brought the changes, which includes colonialism and capitalism, industrialism, Western education, nationalism and reform, and institutional reform. Like acceleration of change, according to Dilip Chitre, the process of modernity that unfold over centuries, like Europe, it took centuries, and India took only 50 years to cover the whole centuries of to cover the history of Europe. This rapid transformation led to a crisis of identity and tradition, forcing Indian writers to engage with foreign traditions creatively. A cross-pollination of cultures, where B.S. Madhekar, as a major Marathi modernist, epitomized this synthesis, that his poetry reflected a fusion of India's deeper, larger native tradition with contemporary world culture, illustrating the interactions between local and global modernist traditions. Oppositional content of Indian modernism. Like despite this aesthetic roots in colonial ideology, Indian modernism was oppositional in nature, nature. D.R. Nagaraj highlighted how writers disillusioned by the co-options of nationalism and spirituality into state apparatures retreated into individual as a means of the resistance. Writers navigate tension between traditional cultural values and modern, often align literary forms, crafting works that addressed local concerns while engaging with global discourses. Okay, so the second part is the historical way of looking at West and India. Indian modernism in a global context. Indian modernism has not been recognized as part of the global modernist movement, largely because the discourse is titled in the favor of Western modernism. Like India is not looked upon as a global as compared to the Western one. So Indian modernism arising in a post-colonial context carried unique political complexities. It wasn't merely derivative of European modernism, but was shaped by the specific socio-political and historical dynamics of the subcontinent. Contextualizing Indian modernism, Western modernism is often seen as detached and universalist, but Indian modernism is rooted in a specific socio-political terrain. Indian modernism engages deeply with the local and historical, addressing contradictions between the past and present. Critics like Rebecca Volkowitz and other advocate for studying modernism in their plural forms, recognizing them as diverse and context specific rather than a monolithic European phenomenon. Reimagining modernism beyond Eurocentrism. Critics like Simon Gikande, Susan Friedman, Laura Doyle, and others argue that non-Western modernism are not simply imitative of Western modernism, and modernism is non-European. In non-European societies such as Asian, Africa, and Latin America should be understood within their own context rather than being relegated to the periphery status relative to a European centers. So yes, looking at my learning outcomes, the impact of translating European poets like Eliot Yeats and development of on the Indian modernist poetry. Okay, so personally, what I feel is as a child, we used to feel sitting over there. Only I felt the translation means whatever we are studying right now. If someone is saying something in English, and what is our mother tongue? That is Gujarati. So what we'll do is someone is saying, to understand, we'll just think it in our own language, and then we'll know that what is trying to say. So that was for me. But when I get to know that how translation works, that how like going into the in-depth, I get to know that, oh, bhai, this is not what I'm thinking. It's totally different. So yes, this was from my side. Thank you. Now I would like to invite Vishva Parmar.
Hello everyone. I discuss part 3 and 4. Part 3, the receptions of Western modernist discourse in India. Indian modernism was meditated by local socio-political dynamics. Each regional tradition evolved based on its unique historical and cultural context. Bengali modernism involved rejecting Tagore's influence. Kannada modernism reflected caste-based tensions and reacted to Nehruvian ideals. Issues like caste, region, and individualism varied in importance across different traditions. The roles of father figures like Tagore was region-specific and not universal applicable. The major points like local dynamic in modernism. The receptions of Western modernist discourse in India was shaped by local socio-political unreal, including the formations of the nation state and shifting power structure. Each literary traditions evolved differently based on its unique historical and cultural givens. Varied manifestation. Modernism in India cannot be generalized due to the differing sensibility and configurations on regional, language, and traditional. Each region and language had its own mode of engaging with a modernist idea. Bengali modernism. In Bengal, modernism involved a deliberate break from Rabindranath Tagore, right, turned away from his influence to meet the demand to their historical moment, using modernism as a tool of rejections and renewal. Kannada modernism was deeply influenced by conflict between Brahminical and non-Brahminical ideologies. It emerged as reactions to the Nehruvian political and cultural environment, reflecting the social tensions, caste, region, and individualism. Modernist traditions in Indian addressed themes like caste, authenticity, freedom, progress, and individualism differently based on regional and cultural context. Role of key figure. The influence of key figures like Tagore was central to Bengali modernism, but not relevant to the development of modernism in Kannada or Malayalam, showcasing the diversity of modernist traditions across India. Part 4, translating modernism, the role of translations in shaping Indian literary traditions. They examine the pivotal roles of translations in shaping modernism within Indian literature by focusing on 3 prominent modernist authors from distinct linguistic traditions, Sudhindranath Dutt, B.S. Martekar, and Ayappa Panikars. It traces the chronological progress of modernist across their literary culture, emphasize how traditional serves to introduce and validate modernist atheistic. As a bilingual authors, they composed critical essays in both English and their native language, actively challenging the prevailing romantic nationalist and romantic mystical regime. Through their translation and critical works, they bridge Indian and Western literary traditions, fostering a transformative redefinitions and of poetic form and content. Chronological evolutions of modernism in Indian literature. Bengali modernism emerged in the 1930s to continued into the 15th. Marathi modernism became prominent in the 1950s and 60s. Malayalam modernism rose in the 1960s and wanted by the late 70s, but not before redefining literary aesthetics. Role of translations in modernist poetics. Translation serves as a medium of introduced modernist idea into Indian literary traditions. Sutindranath Dutt translated French poets Stephen Mallarme and Paul Valéry into Bengali. Ayappa Pinkar translated European poets into Malayalam. B.S. Mardekkar's Arts and the Man emphasized the formalist aesthetics, legitimizing modernist practices. Bilingualism and critical essays. All three authors were bilingual, writing in English and their native language to outline and validate a new poetic mode. Their essays elaborated on modernist aesthetics, contrasting them with the dominant romantic traditions, engagement with Western tradition. These authors were deeply influenced by Western philosophy, art, and literature. Their translations and writing demonstrate a critical understanding of Western modernism, significance, and limitations. Impact of modernism on Indian cultures. Modernism redefined the relationship between content and from in Indian poetry. Discursive prose by these authors serves to translate modernism into the Indian terms, making it accessible and relevant to their audience. Notable translations and contributions. Sudhindranath Dutt and Buddha Dev Bose contributed significantly to the translations of Europe modernist poetry into Bengali. Ayappa Pinekar and B.S. Mardekar expanded the reach of modernist aesthetics through translations and original verse. This is my learning outcome. I understand of the localized receptions and adaptations of Western modernist discourse in Indian poetry, Indian literary traditions, the socio-political and cultural dynamics that shapes Indian modernism, including caste, ethnicity, and regional influences. Explore how traditions and bilingualism facilitated and reinterpretations of modernist aesthetics within the diverse Indian language, while also gaining insights into the involving relationship between content and from in Indian poetry. For further, I would like to call Trupti.
Sudhindranath Datta's views on poetry, tradition, and modernism. Sudhindranath Datta's a critical essay, A Necessity of Poetry, in which he argues that the primacy of the world, in which he discussed with Aristotle, Plato, Byron, and Keats, that, and he proved his mastery through the Western thought. Datta argues poetry is essential across societies, even among the unsophisticated, showing its necessity. Believes only poetry can provide associations where reasons fail, rejecting the centrality of reason in modern society, in which Sudhindranath Datta says that sometimes logic and emotions through the poetry are understand easy, but when the logic and ideas are easy to understand. A role of the creative artist, in which Datta agrees with Virginia Woolf's idea that artist needs moments to retreat, but emphasizes staying connected to society's need, underlines the importance of the message in shaping literary tradition, stating that intellectuals must meet the pragmatic taste of the people. Criticism of Anglicists, in which Datta criticized the writers who follow blindly British traditions, and he called them Anglicists. Critics Anglicists for failing to free the people from colonial illusions. Praises Gemini Roy's use of traditional Indian art to create a universal mode of presentation. Datta's modernist poetics and the crisis of tradition. Modernism and decolonization. Modernism in India was not a celebration of Western values, but a part of decolonizing project. Datta endorses Eliot's commitment to tradition, which he says as revolutionary and necessity of survival. This we can see in the T.S. Eliot's work, Traditional and Individual Talent. The Camel Bird, a poem of crisis and survival. The camel bird in the poem, camel bird as a metaphor, which shows poets' alienation and disconnection from the past, symbolizes by the vulnerable bird, emphasize the need for reinvention and survival in a world of ruins, where the poet searches of meaning amidst violence. West for humanity and community. The poem goes beyond the personal crisis, embodying the inertia of colonized community and the search of humanity in the fragmented world. In this, we can see that the poet is trying to say that the traditional is important, but at the same time, we cannot solve the modern everyday life problem through the tradition. B.S. Madhekar and the transformation of Marathi poetry. Modernist aesthetic in Marathi poetry. Before Madhekar, the Marathi poetry was tradition and simple. But Madhekar adds a new idea and a new way of writing. Madhekar alongside P.S. Raj introduced modernism in Marathi poetry, drawing influences from Western modernists like T.S. Eliot. Both poets reinvented Marathi poetic traditions, revisiting saint poets like Tukaram and Ramdas for a modern audience. Response to cultural fragmentation. Madhekar's work responds to the moral and cultural disintegration his experienced particularly in urban Bombay. His poetry reflects an intricate relationship with tradition and modernity influenced by figures like Jyotiba Phule and Bhimrao Ambedkar. Madhekar in that supports that he mixes the Marathi in Marathi poetry, a traditional words and also a modern everyday life language words. Complex poetic practice. His poetry blends irony and self-reflection, exploring societal contradictions and personal alienations. Key poems and modernist technique. Mice in the Wet Barrel died. Madhekar uses grim imagery such as sadness as a poisonous ice and made of glass to depict the harshness of modern life. The poem reflects urban despair and existential suffering through vivid metaphors. Subversive language and irony. The poet combines modern and archaic language like jeeb and jiva to create a unique poetic voice. In that, we can see that the traditional words and also everyday modern life language. This blend of language creates a strike contrast, enhancing the subversive nature of his work. Although the lights, Madhekar explore urban alienation, blending human and mechanical elements to depict a dehumanized cityscape. The poem highlights despair through vivid contrasting imagery. In the poem, we can see the word like rubber city, which shows a loneliness and sadness in a city life. Learning outcome, role of translation. I understand how translation help connect different culture and languages in Indian poetry. Modernist poetry learn how Indian poets use new ideas and style to make a poetry modern and unique. Cultural influence explore how history and culture shape modern Indian poetry. Regional voices appreciate the importance of regional and local languages in Indian poetry. Global trends see how Indian poets adapt global ideas to fit their own traditions. Now, I would like to call Yashra to continue this presentation.
Hello everyone. As like previously discussed, the article was in the 8 part, so I am discussing the part 7 and part 8. Part 8 is for the concluding part. In the first, the 7th part, it is like the this Ayappa Panikar and his poem Kurukshetra. So how he used the modernist imagery in his poem. So in the article we discussed this. Ayappa Panikar was a romantic poet turned into the modernist, active in shaping the Malayalam literary modernism. His key contribution is to translating the global poetry into Malayalam, advocate for rejecting the traditional prosody in the favor of rhythmic free verse, critical intervention against the colonial figures like Velathul Narayan Menon. The Kurukshetram, the poem, it was published in 1960. Structure 294 lines in the 5 sections with the epigraph of the Bhagavad Gita. Now, in which way we find that the epigraph is written taken from the this Bhagavad Gita. The same thing we find in the T.S. Eliot's poem, The Wasteland also. He is bringing the epitaph from the Greek mythology and Latin mythology. So that we also find. In the theme, we find the reflect moral decline and the societal disintegration again to T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. The same thing we find. Imagery and the themes of Kurukshetram, the opening imagery we find that there is an explosion of decline and chaos. I suck in sip in the tears that spurt, that suggest the organic societal collapse. So, like in the T.S. Eliot's this wasteland, we also find there is a total integration and the whole of the society. The central symbol we find the Kurukshetram as the metaphor for conflict and struggle. Now let's analyze the poem. Public critic of the societal decline. Like the society is, all the people are suffering that. Retreat to private introspection disrupt the harmony and internal visions. Innovation in the mythical figures, highlighting the modern alienation. Rejection of the faith and politics, search for self-reliance. Gandhi as a failed prophet. Redemption sought through the imagination and dreams. So there we find like it was like before all the philosophies are given. In the Indian philosophy, we also find there are all the answers are given, but right now the individually one has to suffer. So that type of imagery we find that. Philosophical insight we find modernist poetic vision reject the allegorical and didactic traditions, integrates the personal and public realms of the existence. Kurukshetram relevance today resonate with the global modernist discourse that offers the critique of contemporary society and the poet's existential struggle. In the ending note, we find the imagination as the sole redeemer in the fragmented world. Panika's legacy, a transformative figure in the Malayalam poetry, bridging the tradition and modernism. So includes the both traditionality and modernism together. A symbolic imagery, we find the navel-born lotus of Brahma, a metaphor for rebirth and creativity. Now, in the ending note, we don't find any personal answer is given, but we find that all the like the existential crisis. And there we find that the visual imagery that we have in the Indian mythology, that Brahma came from the Vishnu's navel. He is sprouted from that. So there we find that. In the part 8 conclusion, we find the post-colonial context and indigenous modernity. How we discussed the whole article in the concluding part. Writers had to access the internal critics of the Western modernity, develop alternative tradition and modernity in the native context, selective assimilation of the Western modernity on their own terms, translation of modernism through the post-colonial perspective. Now they are bringing the modernity from the Western world, but they also have to find out that they find the Indian context into it. So there we find dual nature of relationship, internal dialectic. We find that writers related to their culture and critical outsider, critical provision of the nature of their culture, valued cosmopolitan worldviews. And the external dialogic we find that negotiated with Western modes of without surrendering to ideology, maintain the critical distance from the grand narratives, develop the complex relationship with the fragmented society. Now, what role does the translator play in this context? Enables the writers to be both within and without. Their speech community answer the deep needs for their ambivient existence. Bilingual sensibility demanded expression that could move between native and alien traditions. The modernist subject in Indian context, the fragment is different from the Western context. Colonial modernity operates as the realm of desire, created a new social imagery, and formalist poetic correspondent to the inner world of a desire. Language and self-expression. Language become only reality writers could relate to, enable moment of recognition through the Western modernist discourses. Self-reflective moments was post-colonial in essence, questioned the prevailing limits of freedom, created the interior mode of being. What are my learning outcomes from that? I get to know of the role of the translator in shaping the modernist poetic discourse in Indian literatures. How modernism is brought into the Indian context. Differences between the Indian and European modernism due to post-colonial context. Modernist poets' negotiation between the tradition and the modernity, indigenous and Western. Diversity of post-colonial political ideologies and experimental styles within the Indian modernist tradition. Previously, I used to believe that the Indians are the modernism was brought into the Indian context. It is like just a mimicry. As in the article, it is also mentioned that it is just like a mimicry. The people used to believe that, but in the article we get to know that it was influenced by the modernist Western modernism, but it has its own influence, Indian influence. Importance of studying non-Western modernism to critique Eurocentrism. these are our references, and thank you. Now I'm open for the questions.
And my question is, what key differences do we find in Indian modernism that were not present in Western modernism?
In Western modernism, we find that it was like what are the philosophies were coming from the ancient systems. So they are refusing all the philosophies, and with the World War First and Second, we find there is a total broken of the philosophies that were prevailed in the Western philosophy. The modernism emerging from that. In Indian context, we don't find that, but in the Malayalam culture, in the Marathi culture, or any other culture, we find the regional influences in the modernism. So they are the Indian writers bringing modernism in their own way. They are giving that Indian essence to that modernism. So that we can find that the key difference between the two.
Yes, who is next? Yeah, who is next? Who is next? Who is next? Next. So we are not still getting the question here. Who has asked the next one? We are not still getting the question here. Who has asked the next one? We are not still getting the question here. Who has asked? I think Reshma or Riya should have asked the question. They might have got lost in the mobile phone. They might have got lost in the mobile phone. This is how we come to know that the brain rot is a real problem. The digital culture, the digital life leads to the brain rot. Leads to the brain rot. Yes, do it faster. We are waiting for your question. Yes, do it faster. We are waiting for your question. Do it faster. We are waiting for your question. Yeah, unmute the mic. Yeah, to
So Yash, my
throw more light on Ayappa's Malayalam poem which you discussed in this?
So in the Ayappa's poem, we find that there is a reference of Kurukshetra. The whole imagery is the Kurukshetra. The title also suggested that. Through that, bringing the idea of modernism from the Westland, he also discusses that the Kurukshetra, like there was a chaos, there was a war going on. So same thing in the Indian context, in the mind of the people, in the society, there is also constant war is going on. So through the poem of this Kurukshetra, he is being essential crisis idea, and he also bringing back the mythological characters like Lord Ram, Arjun. Through that imagery, he tries to show that how the mythical figures like Ram and they are also not able to provide the solution into the modern problem. So that type of imagery we find in the poem by the Kurukshetra. Thank you. That is from my side.
Yeah. Okay, so that was the last presentation, and by and large things are presented very well by everybody. Good work is done. I hope that this time we will have an example where everything is gone quite smoothly. But Reshma and Riya thought that that will not be good if everything will go good. So there should be something, as we always tell, that there are always one or two namunas which will always stand apart and say that no, hum nahi sudhrenge. You will have to tell us something. Without that, everything cannot go smoothly well. And that is what we are doing from semester 1. Either this or that student will do some mistake and we'll have to repeatedly keep on commenting on that. And now you are in semester 4 and still the things continues. That is where things becomes very difficult. That changing habits of the people is not an easy task, and making them sincere and other thing. And the people think that arts people are very tough to do. So the value for the arts people normally remains much lower than the other people in job markets and other things also. So we keep on battling with this, that we keep up to the mark our concentration and other thing. As a group we work. As a group means all the arts students of the past, of the present and of the future. They all have to battle and fight these things with the society. That no, we are also very useful, but some from us will always be there to demonstrate that no, you are not still good enough. So collectively everybody's effort is very important when we move as a class or as a large community of people of arts and literature. Well, so by and large things were good. You have used very well the AI tools to see that there are no grammatical errors, or even the questions and other things were also up to the mark there. So writing and other things have improved a lot. Somewhere some of you need to work on giving questions, answering the questions. Answering the questions very well. That is where somewhere you are faltering. So that aspect you can see that are you able to give convincing answer to the question asked or not. And some of you, few 3-4 of you are there who need to work on the speech dynamics also. There is a good improvement in everybody's speech and everything. Some more work, and we hope that after a month or so, when we will have our final presentations in the month of March, I hope you all will be able to present yourself excellently well without any error in your slides, your content, your asking questions, and also in answering. Also, everything will be up to the mark. Yeah? So we end this session here. The tasks that are given, I am ending first the live stream, and then if you have any questions regarding the task that is given, you can ask me also. I'm ending the stream first.